Hey folks, this podcast is sponsored by King Arthur Capital Group. Fund your fight camp, showing fighters how to leverage credit and capital so they can treat their career like a business. Love sharing that information with as many people as can possibly hear it. The sport is only going to get better overall over the long term, the more comfortable and the more stable of situations that fighters at all levels of the sport are in. It's going to be more time to dedicate to being the best fighter that they can be. It'll let them remain in fighting. It'll encourage people to pursue professional fighting. Personal financial management, absolutely essential to the future of mixed martial arts. And if that's something that sounds like it might be up your alley, hit up King Arthur Capital Group at Fund Your Fight Camp on Instagram. Check out my interlude episode with David King Arthur McElroy too, for many of the finer details on King Arthur Capital Group. Check out Fight Club Crate. Mystery fight gear, knockout prices, undisputed value, combat sports boxes delivered monthly. Use my promo code TAPTHAT15 at Fight Club Crate for 15% off your first purchase. They're adding new cool stuff like products very unique, even things that are more common combat sports products, these small businesses and other things that they're including in Fight Club Crate. They keep it really fresh and really cool. It's a very cool service and product that they have. Father's Day is on Sunday. So if you're, looking for a last second absolute winner of a gift for the combat connoisseur in your life, hit up Fight Club Crate on Instagram at Fight Club Crate. Last but not least, Substats is the analytics and intelligence platform for competitive grappling, giving promoters, leagues, commentators the data they've never had, matchmaking tools, athlete profiles, event breakdowns, and match analysis powered by computer vision. If you compete, if you promote, if you just love to grapple, check them out at substats.app. Competitive grapplers, casual grapplers, judo, no-gi jiu-jitsu. Substats does really cool stuff, and check them out at Substats on Instagram. Check out the videos that Abraham Diaz is posting all the time of the different things that he's doing with Substats. Super cool stuff. If you're casual or you're like hardcore or super nerdy about combat sports and grappling, for lack of a better way to put it, that's who it's for. Building the analytics layer of the sport that it's been missing. Athlete profiles, event intelligence, match breakdowns. Check them out at substats.app and use my promo code TAPTHAT for 10% off of your initial purchase with Substats. Check out my interlude episode with Abraham Diaz too. Fascinating conversation. And what is up, everybody? This is Brady Grove bringing you another episode of the Tap That MMA podcast. I'm trying to go for kind of kitschier titles on these videos as I transition, to all this YouTube and Instagram long form, short form video as much as I can possibly do, as much of the technology I can learn, to a 10% level or 5% in a shorter period of time to put that together and, keep momentum if I have any. So what was the point of me even? What's the point of me saying that? One second. All right. Oh, I've done away with numbered episodes, like the numbers, just to go with like a title that makes more sense. Like, you'll see. So I got to get used to not saying the number at the beginning. Anyway, last week, unless you truly live under a physical rock, was UFC Freedom 250. And I gotta say, like, I think the event, like, for so many ways where it could have gone so bad, so many different directions, So many ways that it could have been not as great and not as memorable. UFC Freedom on a Sunday night, like, really delivered. It was very entertaining. Diego Lopez with that crazy comeback to start the card off against Steve Garcia when Diego was in real trouble. Bo Nickel gets the, looked good with his hands against Kyle Dawkins, gets the round one finish. The toughest part of the card to watch was, what happened to Michael Chandler against Mauricio Hoofy. And, like, this is one where I see, like, Mauricio Hoofy's next fight. I could see, like, I could see him being a little bit inflated in the eyes of the public. But, like, this is like, when the last two wins are Fazai, when the knockout against Fazai, I just don't know what that means. It was so out of the blue. But then the win against Michael Chandler was very impressive, but it didn't take Mauricio Hoofy to do that to Michael Chandler in 2026. Michael Chandler still looks like he's in great shape. He's an athletic freak, but it's time. If you're a fan of if you hate Michael Chandler, you don't want to see Michael Chandler again. If you are a fan of Michael Chandler, you don't want to see Michael Chandler again, because it's only going to get uglier from those points. But he wanted that White House fight. Josh Hogan gets the finish against Derek Lewis. That guy's really good. There's nothing else to say. Like he's gonna get, because now Cyril Gahn is, the interim UFC heavyweight champion. If it's not like the next thing for Josh Hogan, then it's one away. That they could easily, it wouldn't shock me if Josh Hogan, like, got a shot at the title, even when, if someone made more sense, or if it makes sense for him to fight Sergey Pavlovich or whatever. I could see them rushing that, because, like, that dude's stock just keeps rising. The Curtis Blades fight was legitimately one of the best heavyweight fights I can ever remember. And then he never even in the few. Here's what I pointed out about that fight that I thought was the most noteworthy, because we knew Josh Hogan was going to be faster. We know that with Derek Lewis, you just have to avoid the shot that he's going to kill you with. And Josh Hogan, when they ended up in a clinch, and Derek Lewis would land like an uppercut in the clinch, there were a couple of harder shots that Josh Hogan did take. But to credit the fight IQ of Josh Hogan, he never once backed himself up against the cage to allow Derek Lewis to, possibly line up a finishing shot. He would have to retreat on a couple of those bigger shots that did land, but then he burst right back into moving forward or to initiate a clinch in some way. So I thought that was actually the most important thing about Josh Hogan's performance, was that his fight IQ was displayed. Sugar Sean O'Malley gets the finish against Ayman Zahabi. All right. I mean, that's really good for Sean's, prospects of getting a title shot very soon, because, they tend to lean that way when somebody, who is a highly ranked contender has a win over the current champion. And, Ayman Zahabi was on such a good streak that he was a very highly ranked bantamweight by the time this fight happened. So, big win for Sean O'Malley. Cyril Gahn gets the finish it. Like, sometimes, this is real life, and not every, sporting event has fairy tale, results to it. And it would have been amazing if Alex Pereira became the first 3-division UFC champion, but it's always like, as dumb as it sounded at the time, I always remember when Izzy lost to Jan for the light heavyweight title, and he said, dare to be great. And it's like, that sounds so corny, like, coming from him, but really, like, there's a lot of truth in that. Alex Pereira was on the verge of doing something that no one had ever been, able to do. Alex Pereira, for his, comparatively brief time in mixed martial arts, is well cemented into the zeitgeist of the UFC and of mixed martial arts. So, I don't know what's next for Alex Pereira, but whatever it is, I'm excited for it. And if, who knows? That guy's throwing a lot of possibilities around. And then finally,
I want to tell me what you see. Let's go ahead and see by the fight what you saw in the ring.
you gotta be shitting me. I'm like, this is where it was like the card did end on like a very storybook note. Justin Gaethje becomes one of the oldest fighters ever to become a UFC champion at 37 years old at the White House event after so many times of falling short of the UFC lightweight title, the real one. The fact that as a plus 440 underdog, he puts on the performance that he did, and it was really so much more meaningful considering this. Let's say Ilya Topuria had gone to a different division, or gone and done some sort of boxing super fight, and then they have a fight for the vacant belt between like Gaethje and Armin Sarukian or Charles, whatever that they could do in that situation. If he won it, like, yeah, he's all right, UFC lightweight champion. Because the other guy left, and Islam Makhachev. But this is different. Ilya was not a guy that's like, Mackenzie Dern could go on to be a very long reigning strawweight champion, but it's going to take some time for people to really respect Mackenzie Dern as a champion because Zhang Wei Li was not beaten for that title. But Ilya Topuria was a guy that people was like, I mean, he was undefeated, that heavy of a favorite against Justin Gaethje, two division champion. Ilya Topuria isn't necessarily, he's not Islam Makhachev, very different skill sets, but it was a prominence level like that. It was not, a championship with an asterisk by it. Justin Gaethje actually just won the UFC lightweight title at 37 years old for what he's been through in violence and in crazy, iconic moments. For what that guy's been through in the UFC and, back to World Series of Fighting. Unbelievable that guy is right now the UFC lightweight champion. After, the Max knockout, after it's, when those kinds of fights, in the lead up to these kinds of fights, it's devastating because you spend all week like, oh my God, like, this fighter that everybody loves who's the underdog here, like they're playing, but imagine if they won, it'd be crazy, it'd be awesome. And then the vast majority of the time, that ends up being a letdown. And the guy that is considered to be, that is the heavy favorite, that has an aura like Ilya Topuria, they end up having their way. But Justin Gaethje really put it on. It was a fantastic performance. The most regrettable part is that like the way it was stopped. They gave Ilya a chance. They clearly, I guess, didn't like what they see or what they saw. At the end of that final round, you hate to see that happen when a fighter under their like standing capabilities like, no, I want to fight, and they'd say that if their eye was hanging out of their socket. But that is a shame. But I really don't think it takes anything away from Justin Gaethje's win. I 0%. So, had to do a sizable UFC Freedom 250 recap. It was such a unique event, and like I talked about with Connor last week, all politics of it aside, watching it was absolutely surreal. A sport that was illegal in the state of New York not long ago, and that politicians not that long ago either were campaigning on wanting to make illegal, and from the level of barbarism that this sport was thought to be associated with and chose to associate itself with for a brief period of time. That's why it almost died. To it be having that event to that production quality on the the White House front lawn was just absolutely insane. It would be like if they like I don't know if they had like a huge like marijuana consumption festival on the White House lawn. Be like, oh, okay, like people in 70 plus are definitely not going to understand what's happening. So excellent. I'm really glad it was on a Sunday night. Nothing was, much less was competing for my attention. That is a weird because it started at 8 too. Like that did go late. So UFC Vegas 119 this weekend. Normal Apex event starting Saturday at 5 p.m. We got 12 fights on the slate. And by the way, ACA 204, Cage Warriors 206 and 207, LFA 235, Octagon 90, KSW 119. Lots of combat sports action happening from some of the best promotions in the world outside of the UFC. So, for picks on all that stuff and more, follow me on Instagram at RotoBrady MMA. And, trying to find a way to get in a rhythm of, putting out videos or whatever the hell, to cover those events as well. Because I always prided myself on the work that was put into making picks for so many different events of different levels. And, that's been a tougher part to adjust to as I get to this, mostly video format. So, first off, we've got a featherweight fight between Shane Collins, 7-0 Shane Collins, and 10-1 Otari Tanzalovi. All right. This is Shane Collins is the minus 200 favorite. I think that's gone up. I think Collins must have taken money a little bit. So let's to start off with Shane Collins. I do love this guy's resume. His nickname's Hollywood. That's always like plus 5 points. 26 years old and 5-0 in Uriah Faber A1 combat, where he was recently the featherweight champion just back in May. And defended that. That was his second title defense, and he had already had a win over Cody Vogels in Uriah Faber A1 combat. A very good amateur career too on the international level, and every single I think let's say he's only had 2 decisions out of 7 professional fights. 4 wins by knockout, 1 by submission. Otari Tanzalovi, 10-1. This guy hails from the country of Georgia, 28 years old, 7 wins by knockout, 3 wins by decision. His only loss is by decision, and that was on the Contender Series to Josiah Musasa by split decision. I appreciate this guy's professional pedigree up to this point as well. Fought in GFC, UAE Warriors, touched Octagon with a C. Has a very close fight on the Contender Series, and then just is coming off a decision win against Guillermo Torres, 7-1 Guillermo Torres at Fury FC 101. I guess not just coming off, that's, over a year ago. So, that is an aspect that does, shy me a little bit more away from Otari. Really, I think that this line has gotten a little bit too inflated in favor of Collins. This isn't, Collins doesn't have the experience at the Contender Series level, and this is going to be his UFC debut. He just fought back on May 2nd. And, Otari has won in a lot of high-quality promotions. He was, one judge's scorecard away from getting a win on the Contender Series. So I think Otari moneyline makes sense. I used him in a lot of DFS lineups, too. You could go by knockout just because that's how he's won the vast majority of his fights. But I don't think you need to do that at plus 170. And given the circumstance of how fresh these guys are going to be to the UFC, I think that there's a greater level of variability to how this fight could end than their history suggests. Next up, we got a women's bantamweight matchup between Carol Rosa and Luana Santos. This was a pretty closely handed. Yeah, minus 120. Rosa is the favorite. Luana Santos plus 100. Resume wise, or like historically, track record, whatever you want to say, it's because it is really easy to poke holes in like what Luana Santos' route to victory would be. Carol Rosa is a very consistent UFC bantamweight, and consistent also in that she has not won or lost more than one fight in a row since March of October of 2021. Yeah. And that covers a span of like 7 or 8 fights. She's coming off a win against Nora Cornole by decision August of 2025. She won 2 of her last 3. The other was a unanimous decision win over Pani Kianzad. She had a decision loss to Eileen Perez. And every fight she's ever had in the UFC has gone the distance. She's got, popped to, never finished anybody, but like she's had knockdowns. Those have made, the difference probably in at least 1 or 2 split decisions, or close decisions. And, can strike with volume. She's like good at matching a pace. She has a ceiling on the level of opponent she can be, but like whatever pace, whatever you're going to try to do, I think she goes with the flow well. So like Carol Rosa, it's easy to see why that feels like a very like reliable, pick, and you wouldn't be shocked if it didn't happen. But at minus 120, makes sense for how consistent of a performer she's been in the UFC. Now, Luana Santos, 10-2 as a pro, only lost 1 fight in the UFC so far. That was to Casey O'Neill by unanimous decision. And now, like, in terms of like the level of opponents they've each faced, it's no comparison in favor of Rosa. And yeah, like Tanara Lisboa and Maria Agapova, Stephanie Egger, and Juliana Miller too. Like, and she's finished fights. Important to note. And I think it'd be possible to submit Carol Rosa. She, that has not happened a lot, but Luana hasn't had to have many like high striking volume fights, even though she finished Juliana Miller the way that she did. The thing is, Luana's 26. And so I think that she's going to keep improving. To have this record in the UFC and, to then be coming off that win over Melissa Croden, who had momentum at bantamweight too, I would not be shocked if Luana has, taken a big enough step up. And maybe the line is already kind of accounting for that. But I used Luana Santos in a few DFS lineups. I used Carol Rosa too. I think any money I have down, we'll go through what I actually put on Instagram. But any money I put down was on Carol Rosa. But it's not it's not one that I would feel as strong as I would for another Carol Rosa fight, because this is somebody that I think has a greater potential for, improvement since their last fight. So next up, we have Leon Shabazian and Levon Chokili. I'm probably getting that wrong. At welterweight. Leon he was a pretty heavy underdog last time I saw. Plus 310 underdog. Levon, the minus 375 favorite. Leon Shabazian. Recognizable last name. And the dude's 12-4 as a pro, 30 years old. Coming off a win at Tough Enough back in March over 14-9 Robert Hale. Here's why I run into problems already with Leon Shabazian. It's a guy that I do want to. I would love to see him succeed in the UFC. I do like that dude, but like, in his professional, even the 4 wins he's had in a row, since he lost to Ryan Loder on United Fight League. Also lost to got knocked out by Phil Rowe in the Contender Series. Lost to Gabe Green earlier in his career at CXF8 in 2017. Even though he's fought UFC quality guys like over the span of his career without having been in the UFC, he hasn't won those, and it's not an overly impressive string of not bad opponents by by a stretch of the imagination, but like not even this tough enough win. It's like, all right, like these 4 tough enough wins, all by round 1 submission. Now Levon, also out of Georgia, 14-3 as a pro, 29 years old, 11 wins by knockout, 3 by decision. He's got 1 loss by knockout, 1 by submission, 1 by decision. And Leon Shabazian, all 4 of his losses are by knockout. Gotti Yamauchi is the guy who submitted Levon 2 at Bellator 279. And I think what was it? He ended up 4-3 in total in Bellator. And fought recognizable folks. There's nothing like if you're gonna go with Leon Shabazian, just sweeten the pot more and take Leon by sub. I don't have high confidence in him. I have confidence in Levon's track record, absolutely. His last 2 losses are Lorenz Larkin and Gotti Yamauchi. So I think that the most likely route there is Levon by knockout. But, decisions there too. That's not the worst method of victory, double chance. But Levon's a, pretty heavy favorite. So maybe play it a little bit more narrow. All right. Next up. The hell, I'm 3 fights in. Jesus Christ, I shouldn't have done a recap that explosive at the beginning.
I want to tell me what you see. Let's go ahead and see by the fight what you saw in the ring.
Featherweight. Gaston Bayanos against former Tap That Podcast guest Michael Aswell Jr. Michael Aswell, who I love, is the minus 400 favorite. Gaston Bayanos, the plus 330 underdog. So I have Michael Aswell in one of my parlays, but I do have like a few bucks on Gaston Bayanos money line. I think to the hell's my mouse? It's not working right now. The hell is that? All right. Still on? It's still good? Yep. All right. Go back to this. Yeah, I had to take Gaston Bayanos at that part. Here's the thing about Michael Aswell. He's got great hands. Standing up, he throws a crazy amount of volume. He had he had a really close loss to Bogdan Grad on the Contender Series. He landed 155 significant strikes in that fight. Give margin of error for those statistics. But then that fight with Blagioki, where he made it really tough on Blagioki to get that win. He gets the knockout over Lucas Almeida, and Michael Aswell is mostly a guy at this level that seems to go the distance. He doesn't have like huge power at featherweight. As evidenced by 155 strikes landed, not a knockdown. Lucas Almeida seemed compromised, as I recall, in that fight. So, but Michael Aswell took care of business that night. And it's coming off of the unanimous decision loss to Luke Riley, 30-27 on all three judges' scorecards. And he's young, obviously. Gaston Beyond is 8 years older. They're about the same size too, but like Gaston Beyond getting submitted by Kwang Lei the way he did, like that wasn't a great look. His knockout loss to Marcus McGee was easily forgivable. This guy's won a couple of decisions in the UFC, not against high quality opponents, but Michael Aswell just ends up in close fights. And if this one's close, and if Gaston Beyond is landing with like a little bit more power, for sure. Even if you disagree with the decision at the end of it, for sure, Gaston Beyond could end up getting this decision. That's the risk in the style of Michael Aswell is kind of like Rob Font, like you got to land so many strikes, and it takes so much effort and commitment throughout the course of 3 rounds. And it still might not be enough. It comes down to how individual judges see the damage being done. So yeah, like Gaston Beyond's money line, if you're gonna go Michael Aswell specifically, I'd go by decision. I would go with that, and until something tells me otherwise. He's been going the distance at this level, and even though Gaston Beyond got knocked out by Marcus McGee, that doesn't make me think that he's at tremendous risk of getting knocked out by Michael Aswell. So I'm definitely rooting for the Texas kid. And best of luck to Michael Aswell. I hope he gets another win in the UFC. But I do think that number on Beyond is crazy. Next up, we got a flyweight fight between Alan Nascimento and Mitch Raposa. Alan Nascimento, he was a minus 190, like 8 favorite the last time I saw it. He's minus 180 right now. Mitch Raposa plus a 155 underdog. Alan Nascimento has won 4 fights in a row over Jake Hadley, Carlos Hernandez, Alfredo Fila, and Cody Durden. All right, that is a decent enough stretch against guys that were definitely capable of getting the win another time out. Maybe not Hernandez, but Filo, Cody Durden, Jake Hadley, those are definitely meaningful wins to string together. Unfortunately, it just came over an extended period of time for Alan Nascimento. He's fought 4 times since May of 2022. But impressive streak nonetheless, because he, lost on the Contenders Series to Raulian Paiva, and then lost by a split decision to Tajiro Lembekov in his UFC debut. So it's been smooth sailing since then. Mitch Raposa coming off of a unanimous decision win over Azat Maksum, and lost 2 split decisions before that to Andre Lima and Sumata Hari. Got submitted by Jake Hadley on the Contenders Series. With Mitch Raposa, I thought that the result of the Azat Maksum fight, to me, really was like, it wasn't like, oh, Mitch Raposa's over some sort of hurdle. It's that like, oh, Azat Maksum does not belong here, it seems. Azat Maksum took Mitch Raposa down. Mitch Raposa didn't get a takedown. He won that fight on a unanimous decision from the merits of the strikes that were landed. So I'm still not, I'm nowhere close to convinced on Mitch Raposa. Alan Nascimento has a, very proven track record in the UFC. That tells me, like, when you win those 4 fights in a row, it's like, yes, this guy belongs in these spots. With Mitch Raposa, the jury's still very much out on just that fact alone. So I don't dislike at all Nascimento. Like, I definitely use Nascimento in a good amount of DFS lineups, and minus 180, that's not bad for what I think the actual gap is in this fight. And so I'm not gonna play that. Yeah, no, I wouldn't have believed in that sound drop. But I forgot to do this at the beginning. Next up, Got a women's bantamweight matchup again between Bia Mesquita and Melissa Mullins. Love this matchup. Melissa Mullins is an opponent of quality, and really interested to see after the start Bia Mesquita has had in the UFC to see like how far she can take this. So Bia is the minus 600 favorite. Melissa Mullins the plus 450 underdog.
I want to tell me what you see. Let's go ahead and see by the fight what you saw in the ring.
So, Bia Mesquita, like many of the highly decorated jiu-jitsu folks that come to mixed martial arts, later when they're submitting everybody to start off, and that should make you nervous because we've seen that not go well so many times. But like after Bia was able to do that, like to Irina Alexeva and Monse Rendon, back to in a span of like 5 months. She seems like she's very, 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 very good on the ground, and her opponents in both those fights weren't able to like get anything off. That's how good she was down there. I would love if Bia Mesquita made a quick run of the bantamweight ladder. I like Melissa Mullins, but I'm gonna be rooting for Bia in this fight. Melissa Mullins coming off a unanimous decision loss to Daria Zeleznikova, June of 2025. She has a win over Claudia Saigula and Irina Alexeva. Irina Alexeva got a knockdown in that fight too. That wasn't an easy night of work for Melissa Mullins. She got knocked out by Nora Cornole. Those are only 2 professional losses. Never lost by submission, but anybody in the world in this weight class can lose to Bia Mesquita by submission, even if you never tapped in, in your no-gi class when you're rolling, your whole life. You can still get submitted by this. Obviously, that wasn't a good comparison. But you get it. She's very, very good at jiu-jitsu. That much has shown through. It is always nerve-wracking when, like, women's bantamweight matchup, the odds are this skewed, and it's not like a tight like we used to see with the Manel Nunes lines. But Melissa Mullins is going to be a nice, step on to take resume wise for Bia, but I see no reason why Bia doesn't, end up in a position to lock up a submission, at some point in this fight. I don't really think Bia's in like. She's way, 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 way universes better at what she's really good at than Melissa Mullins is in like any individual area. That's so in this matchup, I think you just got to believe strongly in the person that has by far the greatest of strengths between the two of them. If this ends up in a dangerous position for Melissa Mullins in any way, it's an emergency, in serious danger of ending by submission. So, like, I think, by the way, I know I took, over 2.5 rounds in the Carol Roosevelt. I did that in another fight later. Yeah, Bia's minus 600. Bia by submission, and I think to like, because being round 1 by submission is plus 225. Being round 2 is plus 400. That's what I'd go with. Just a little bit more reward there, and I think there's probably an equal chance that either one of them can happen. Obviously, Vegas disagrees with that, which means I'm probably wrong. But things happen. Time goes by. You get stood up when you shouldn't, like we saw, last week. Whatever. So between round 1 and round 2, it doesn't make as much difference to me when an opportunity will present itself, the easiest for her. So plus 400 in round 2 by submission is, maybe one of the shots I'd take. And next up, we've got a flyweight matchup between Andre Lima and Kevin Borjas. Kevin Borjas is the plus 475 underdog. Andre Lima, the minus 650 favorite. I think that's a bit of a leap. So the Contender Series win over Rickson Zenedine was good. His UFC debut against Igor Severino.
I want to tell me what you see. Let's go ahead and see by the fight what you saw in the ring.
He gets bit. Wins by DQ.
Fuck off. Take care of your underwears. I'm gonna you, man.
All the more a curious move by Igor Severino, considering he was absolutely winning the fight up to that point. So, for Andre Lima, I just considered in that fight, like, good thing you were bitten, because if that ended up going the distance, I don't think you were going to get the win. Split decision win over Mitch Raposo. Unanimous decision win over Felipe Dos Santos, September of 2024. Not not a particularly impressive performance. And then coming off a submission victory over Daniel Perez. And Daniel Perez, since, being on the Contender Series in 2021, 17-8, by the way, was born in 1988. He's got one win in the UFC. He showed a lot of dog against Luis Garuli last month, but I don't see a ton there for Andre Lima's resume still. And it's not like the wins are like super flashy highlight reel kinds of wins. The bite was memorable. Kevin Borjas has won once in the Contender Series, and then in the real UFC, he is 1-4 with a win over Ronaldo Rodriguez. But Kevin Borjas, like, against Manel Rodriguez, like, he was off to a, he did good things in that fight. I think Kevin Borjas is absolutely a danger to Andre Lima. I think Kevin Borjas, at the very least, will force things to happen in the fight. And I think that, that's where we don't see a ton from Andre Lima. And so if striking volume starts to come out, like, absolutely Kevin Borjas can come away with a win. And I think that, like, the line is crazy here. Plus, I definitely put, sprinkled a little bit on Kevin Borjas' money line. For Lima, I guess you would say by decision if you had to pick. It's still not getting for a fight I think it's way closer, and for picking a method of victory, that's not the best to me. Lines are made for a reason. Very time proven reasons, but I don't see how the folks out there think there is that great of a separation between the two. Next up, we have a featherweight matchup between Vinicius Oliveira and Andre Fili. Andre touchy-feely. And I definitely used Vinicius Oliveira in several DFS lineups this week too. Vinicius Oliveira is the minus 285 favorite. Andre Fili, the plus 245 underdog. Andre Fili lost 2 of his last 3. He does have that split decision win over Christian Rodriguez, August of 2025. We very much, what to expect from Andre Fili. He's a good boxer. And yeah, that's his basic, and he, puts himself in not the best position sometimes. he's been win, loss, win, loss, win, loss, win, loss for about 4 years now. And over so much time, like, he's come up short against the guys that hover around the ranking, those sorts. Ige, Mel Costa, Jose Delgado, wherever he'll be at some point. Nathaniel Wood, Jonathan Brito, Bryce Mitchell, Sadiq Yusuf came up short in those. And so the amount of wins that he's collected recently, it doesn't read as impressive as you might think considering his tenure. Vinicius Oliveira, 23-4 as a professional, born in 1995, 5 years younger than Andre Fili. Oliveira is coming off a second-round submission loss to Mario Batista just back in February. And, Mario Batista, who has won, like 10 of his last 11 or something, including wins over Ricky Simone, Jose Aldo, Patchy Mix, and the only loss in that time was Junimar Nurmagomedov. Damn. Mario Batista, every time it's like, I think that whole part's done. And now, that dude keeps winning. Credit to him. But, Oliveira, the 3 best wins on his resume read so nice. A decision win over Ricky Simone, a decision win over Said Nurmagomedov, and a decision win over Kyler Phillips. And that's better than what Andre Fili's been up to. And Vinicius Oliveira, I think, is going to negate a lot of the advantages that Andre Fili would have in other matchups at featherweight. I know I have Oliveira in some parlays and stuff. This isn't one where I would be jumping to take a method of victory or anything. With Andre Fili, and I think that there's just a little too many a few too many variables that enter in this one, and I'm not I wouldn't be super confident about any specific method of victory. Only to say that Andre Fili has been, not the easiest person, I guess, and not many people have been able to do it. I don't know. And Oliveira's spread, maybe, I'm confident in the matchup for Oliveira. I think the best value you get for that guy this week is it might be in DFS. Next up, we've got a featherweight matchup between Melzik Bagdasaryan and Murtazali Magomedov.
Take care of your underwears. I'm gonna you, man.
Magomedov, that is a tough last name in a good way. Melzik is a plus 285 underdog. Murtazali is the minus 350 favorite. Let's start with Magomedov. Okay, so 10-0 as a professional. Hails from Kyrgyzstan. 26 years old. 5 wins by knockout, 5 by submission. Has a win on the Contenders Series. Was a defending champion at Octagon with a C for, and had a number of fights under that banner against opponents with, not horrific records. Like I said, but all of his pro wins, 10-0, all wins inside the distance, including the title fights. This is a guy that we expect to have the last name Magomedov. He's a finishing machine. Did well in international competition as well as an amateur. And now, getting the round 1 knockout too, in the Contender Series against another undefeated opponent is telling to just his readiness level to come in and get a finish like that. And we saw the same thing from Callan. When he came into that match with Antoine Ho, and he gets that night, and the momentum of that, carried well over the long term for sure. And so Melzik Elzik has lost 2 of his last 3 against. He got submitted by Josh Kulabau. He got knocked out by Gene Silva. The win in the meantime was Tucker Lutz by unanimous decision. Only wins against 3 of these 4 wins, counting the Contender Series, are against entry-level UFC guys. Tucker Lutz is a tier above that. I don't know how far those are separated, but I think a tier above. I this is not going to be an entry level dude. Is Magomedov? That pokes just as many holes as you can in the case for Melzik Baldessarian. Cool about is you can forgive the knockout loss to Gene Silva because that dude's a freak, but the fight with Josh Kulabau, you'd like to see someone be able to get that win. Even if Magomedov is not as good as his people that rate those sorts of things might look. Magomedov's resume reads like somebody that is gonna do some damage in this division before taking a real step up in competition, and then we see where the dude's really at. But otherwise, he's minus 350. I'm played him plenty in DFS, and Murtazali inside the distance. Is that decent? Minus 135 for inside the distance for Magomedov. Absolutely hit that. I am shocked that number is stomachable. Next up. 3 fights left. Okay. Hyder Emil and Christian Rodriguez at featherweight. Hyder Emil is the underdog at plus 170. Christian Rodriguez, the minus 200 favorite. Equally intriguing fighters for different reasons. So let's talk about Christian Rodriguez first. As you'll recall, after he got a win in his second UFC fight, after a loss to Jonathan Pierce, April of 2023, he fights Raul Rosas Jr. Shuts him down on the ground, beats a highly touted prospect. Cameron Simon wasn't a highly touted prospect, but that was a dude that was young and was in fights with a lot of guys that were on their way up. And, he lost those fights, but those are the measuring sticks. Yeah, Cameron Simon, definitely not an easy win for a lot of this division, but he beats him too by unanimous decision. Beats Isaac Dolgarian by split decision, despite getting taken down 7 times in that fight by Isaac Dolgarian. The other win is against Austin Bashi. Christian Rodriguez really was on a run against prospects and younger dudes, and he's lost 3 of his last 4 now. But that was a result in a step up in established competition. He got submitted by Julian Erosa. He lost by split decision to Andre Fili. He lost by unanimous decision to Mel Costa. This dude's game isn't overall pretty at all, but there's no denying the talent that he's shown that he's able to beat on a given night. And now, Hyder Emil is a different kind of opponent. He's not one of those dudes. Hyder Emil is certainly closer to, the opponents that have beaten Christian Rodriguez than he is to, Joshua Weems. Hyder Emil is a curious case, too. He's lost 2 in a row now. He got knocked out by Jose Delgado and then lost by decision to Jamal Emmers. But, when you have a split decision win against William Gomi, who obviously doesn't have plans to take you down or anything, but we've seen power from Hyder Emil. We've seen the ability to rack up volume. He won his fight on the Contender Series and getting taken down 5 times. Jamal Emmers took him down 7 times, and that ended up being 30-27 on 2 of the 3 judges' scorecards, 29-27 from Salim Hanif. I very much see a case for Hyder Emil money line. Just because, like, if it ends up, like, if a greater percentage of this is fought on the feet than is expected, Hyder Emil can score, with what he does and the way he normally approaches a fight. There's power there, but, definitely the ability to, keep pace and induce death by 1,000 cuts more so. What did I say? Christian Rodriguez was what level of favorite? Minus 200. That's a little far for me on this one. Christian Rodriguez by decision could make a lot of sense. That's the single most likely fight outcome in that one. I don't know what share of the probabilities it's getting, but I think it's the single most likely outcome. But like Hyder Emil, the money line is appealing enough at plus 170, and I think it could be by knockout or by decision. You ended up with something good odds wise, and taking that reasonable step. Christian Rodriguez is just very strange in that, like, the fighters that he beats and the fighters that he hasn't been able to get into a rhythm against yet. But certainly likes fighting people that are, coming in on a wave of momentum, and yeah. So wait to the co-main event.
I want to tell me what you see. Let's go ahead and see by the fight what you saw in the ring.
Take note to this WNBA hat. I had it at Target the other day for $11.99. No brainer.
Take care of your underwears. I'm gonna you, man.
All right, so we're on to the co-main event of the evening. Light heavyweight, Ian Cutelaba and Navajo Sterling. Navajo Sterling, he's expensive in DraftKings this week, and I didn't end up using him much, if at all. It's, he can win fights and look beautiful doing it, and you walk away very impressed. But some of those fights just don't end up being high-scoring DFS performances. So, like, I didn't even end up thinking he was, like, super worth the price the way I was making, most of those lineups. Cutelaba, the plus 250 underdog. Let's start with Ian Cutelaba. Been with the UFC since 2016. Fought so many of the best 205-pound fighters in the world over that stretch of time. As a win over Khalil Roundtree. He fought Glover. He fought Magomed twice in a row. He got put through that ringer. Lost to Ryan Spann, Kenny Nchekwu, Felipe Lenz. It wasn't looking pretty for Ryan Cutelaba, but now he's won 3 of his last 4. He lost it by a split decision to Modestas Bukauskas. Believe they both got tired, but also Bukauskas has kind of been like a different dude since his return to the UFC. But Cutelaba has beaten Ivan Erslan by split decision, submitted Iba Erslan. Those are 2 different names I just said. And now he's coming off a submission victory over Umar Sy back in March. Now, Navajo Sterling, 9-0 as a professional. Born in 1997 as a 6'4" frame, 79-inch reach. Unique body type for light heavyweight. And undefeated as a professional and in the UFC. He has finished, he's won 3 of his fights by decision, to include Tuco Tokos, Ivan Erslan, and Rodolfo Beato. Navajo Sterling and these are all like entry level UFC wins. But at his best in there, Navajo Sterling just has a very smooth flow about him in the stand up. And it doesn't have to be a knockout. Like if the shot comes, the shot comes. But he's also quite dangerous over the course of 3 rounds. And I think finishing every round for that dude is a possibility. He's very dynamic and unique for light heavyweight. Problem being here, like Ankudalaba is the weirdest stretch of 3 out of 4 wins, and yeah, and the Modestus fight was a greater indication of where Modestus was than Ankudalaba. You have to make some leaps in your projection of Navajo Sterling, but he hasn't given us a reason not to. He really has look, things have gotten a little bit more dangerous, a little bit more difficult, but those are important experiences to have in the UFC. And if you deal with those things well, footage real bad. And Ankudalaba, he got knocked out by some high quality light heavyweights, but he's been knocked out plenty in his UFC career. That'll be it's not I wouldn't necessarily do the spread on Sterling to cover 3.5 because Kudalaba, if he dives for a takedown or two, or Navajo Sterling sometimes can be maybe a little too pretty. I could see rounds being dropped here and there on the scorecards. But I think by Sterling by decision or by knockout, method of victory, double chance, or just pick your favorite there. I think that makes the most sense. He's just a little bit too expensive for my taste in DraftKings this week. And folks, we are to the main event of the evening.
I want to tell me what you see. Let's go ahead and see by the fight what you saw in the ring.
Oh my God, I love this fight. The rematch from Ryzen so many years later. I love that a fight between 2 former Ryzen competitors. And for Horiguchi, what promotion did he not fight with and find success? But a Ryzen rematch here with these stakes, with the winning streaks that both of these dudes are on, it's this is a very exciting main event, and it's far and away my favorite fight on the card. It was so frustrating to be a Starboy fan there for a second. And at different times, it was hard to be a fan of anybody coming over from one of the other major promotions to the UFC. That was not going well for a stretch. But for Manel Kape, it was things weren't going well at the beginning. And, you could very easily argue that he should have been the person to win in the Matheus Nicolaus fight. And that, that was a slightly bad decision, not in his favor. But we've really seen a new version of Starboy, where between August of 2021 and 2023, after he lost to Matheus Nicolau and Alexander Pantoja in his UFC debut, the winning streak had Ode Osborne, David Dvorak, Zhalgas Zhumagulov, and Felipe dos Santos. Okay, 2 of those guys are fringe ranking guys at different points. They were. The other dudes that didn't tell me anything. And Felipe dos Santos, I believe, was a late replacement and still gave Starboy a hard fight. Then there's a very strange, 2-way passive fight against Muhammad Makayev, where Starboy was able to stop all of the takedowns, or most of the takedown attempts, from Muhammad Makayev, and he was just they were both frozen for different reasons when they were standing up. Um, oh, yeah, so the Muhammad Makayev fight also just makes it's like, dude, get that guy back here. What are we doing? Like, he seriously, he could not have been that bad. Muhammad Makayev legitimately right now, if he came back to the UFC, there'd be precedent for him to immediately like challenge for whatever belt he wants to compete for. And two different weight classes, but both of those are possibility. And so it's just weird that Muhammad Makayev is still in like Brave CF and stuff. I really thought like that untouchable. That's true, but this 3-fight winning streak that Starboy is on since the Makayev fight, because the last like few years, it's like, like Starboy, like he really like has, that stand up skill set, and he's a very unique fighter for 125 pounds. He's got flair to him, of course. But at the end of like every year there were always like decent odds on Starboy to be like, UFC champion by the end of whatever calendar year it was. And like it's been a few years now where people are like, I think Starboy is like, and like very interesting personality too since he came over to the UFC, but like now it's like that's a very, very real possibility. Again, it before, before with Starboy, when he first picked up real momentum in the UFC, I feared that like after the Muhammad Makayev fight, that there was going to be like a category of fighters he was not going to bring his A game against. But Starboy beat Bruno Silva with a 3rd-round knockout, and did like that was like the start of like this string of beautiful performances from Starboy. Ends up knocking out Azul Almabayev in the 3rd round. There were like a bunch of rule violations and whatnot in that fight. But Starboy was absolutely eating him alive standing up, and Azul Almabayev was not able to get Starboy down to the ground. I don't think he made like a huge. He tried 6 takedowns. That's nothing crazy, especially considering the damage and the danger that he got into in round 3. And then he's coming off a round 1 knockout win over Brandon Royval, which for such a long time, it has been this like measuring stick of only the best of the best beat Brandon Royval. That changes, as people get older and whatnot. But Bruno Silva, Azul Almabayev, Brandon Royval, all in a row, all by knockout. Now Starboy, like this is before it just would have been interesting. Now it's like this dude might right now be the best flyweight in the world. Now Kyoji Horiguchi, I love this guy so much. He's these characters are such an important part of the mixed martial arts world. 36-5, 35 years old, 14-1 in Ryzen, 9-1 in the UFC, 2-2 in Bellator. The legitimacy that a champion of Kyoji Horiguchi, or that like a little bit of time ago, like that Gegard Mousasi carried, when it's like, all right, not in the UFC, but this promotion's champion, I'm this promotion's champion. Kyoji Horiguchi is a very important part of the worldwide mixed martial arts, conscious, for putting on so many good fights in the Ryzen and Bellator spaces, and 9-1 in the UFC, and not to mention He has a win over Starboy by submission going back, 9 years or so. And since he came to the UFC, in his last fight in Ryzen was a defense of the Ryzen flyweight belt against Nikazimulo Zulu. In a row, coming back to the UFC, beats Tajir Lembekov and Amir Albazi. The Tajir win was awesome considering the struggles we saw so many non-UFC major promotion fighters, get into. But Amir Albazi was when it's like, oh, like he's here, he's right now, like he is going for the title, and he's looked great. Him and Starboy both look great. It's what makes this matchup and the history between it makes it so much more exciting. Starboy's minus 160. I hopped on DraftKings earlier in the week to, see what all was available and what it looked like. And they didn't have like anything more specific than I think like money lines and maybe over unders at that point. But Starboy minus 160, I don't dislike that at all. I think that like this one's gonna be close and like, or it could end in a knockout. For sure. He's been on such a good run with that. Did he unlock a different, wrinkle? Just having, 15 fights canceled in the UFC under, different people being to blame. I went on such a long train about that. But I mean, he really has looked like the best version of Manel Starboy Kape over these last 3 fights. And, Kyoji Horiguchi has like accomplished like similar things in his 2 fights, back with the UFC. And I always remember with Kyoji Horiguchi, wins over Hiromasa Koba. I believe they fought 3 times. I think he won. It goes back a ways. He beat him for the Shudo title back in 2013. But on this guy's resume, the losses in MMA are: one is Mighty Mouse, was Kaya Sakura. That fight was avenged in the next fight for Kyoji Horiguchi, and he knocked Kaya Sakura out in round 1. He avenged the Sergio Pettis loss and won by decision at Ryzen 47. Lost to Patchy Mix, but I swear to God, everybody, it was true that for a period of time, Patchy Mix was a very dangerous dude. Kyoji Horiguchi is very dangerous now, remains so. I still, I said it before Starboy's last fight, I still very much have reservations when you could have won the Nicolau fight. You could have won the Muhammad Makayev fight, where you fought off the, grappling, which was the, biggest, deficit between you two going into the fight with Makayev. It became frustrating when it just seemed like for a while he had this block where he was, shy to pull the trigger. But in these last 3 fights, we see when this dude lets his hands go, he's a fighter in a small percentage in the UFC that is capable of entering a true flow state. When he gets into a rhythm, now you're in serious danger. But he seems like if he doesn't it just seems like he might struggle to get going. This is 5 rounds, so that gives him plenty of time to make up for that and do damage later. I mean, Kyoji Horiguchi has 6 wins by submission. I mean, yeah, this one's kind of a flip of the coin. I love both of these dudes so much. I'm fine with Starboy and Moneyline, or, probably not much more value, but to by decision or by knockout. Either one of these guys being able to fight for, like, being in position to contend for the UFC Flyweight title is awesome in 2026. Um, so much of the weight of my pick for the main event comes down to the eye test. Like, Kyoji Horiguchi looked great in his two return fights to the UFC. Starboy looked like a samurai sword, like cutting through a bunch of stuff that is either made of paper or melts, whatever saying works for the moment. But he actually got it together and actually won those 3 fights in a row. I get like I'm probably rooting for Starboy, but either one of these guys winning, that puts a smile on my face. I love both of these dudes for their history and rising and whatnot. Starboy money line by knockout or by decision. Koji Horiguchi money line is fine. I use both of these guys in DFS. This is a very close matchup, and maybe the greatest risk to Starboy going into this fight is Manel Kape. Like, are you gonna be ready with your hands to get going and get off on a hot note, and don't let Kyoji Horiguchi take control of you like he did in where he beat you 9 years ago or whatever. Oh boy. All right, folks, that is the end of another episode of the Tap That MMA podcast. We just covered all 12 UFC fights for UFC Vegas 119. And so now, real quick before we go, I'll show you. So I'll show you. I'll share my screen here and show you specifically what I bet and like what my lineups look like. That's it. Those were the first 2 that I bet was Starboy moneyline minus 162, and that little parlay with Vinicius Oliveira and Alan Nascimento that got it to plus money. So I just started off with that one, and then here this will be a reel, but these are what my parlays look like. I'll rewind this once. Rosa money line. Can't really say that one. Borjas underdog. And then here's what the DFS lineups look like. I'll play that one more time. Yep. So, where you want to spend the majority of your budget, the higher priced, ticket item. I don't think like Sterling is, worth that price and whatnot. And I think, Michael Aswell could do very well with the numbers he puts up if he gets the win. But I think that one's closer than it's handicapped as. That's what I was thinking with the, DFS in general. And I did some lineups too where I didn't use Horiguchi or Starboy. And that was actually a lot harder. Even when, I did some variations for each of them. So, folks, thank you so much for listening to another episode of Tap That. UFC Vegas 119 on Saturday at 5 p.m. Follow me on Instagram at RotoBrady. Let me stop sharing this screen real quick. And check out all the recent interlude episodes too. I just had Tristan Ferris of Kentucky Insider and A Sea of Blue on to talk about the Kentucky basketball off season. Check that out. And I've got Bad Matt Adams coming on the podcast this weekend. Can't wait to put that one out. One of my favorite heavyweight prospects in the game. And I haven't been able to see him live yet at Ohio Combat League, but it was just announced that he is going to be on the Contenders Series in August. So that opportunity may have permanently passed me by. Folks, thank you so much for listening. Have yourselves a great week. Enjoy UFC Fight Night, and look out for the other content I'll be putting out across the wide world of niche sports that I occupy. Thank you all. Have a great weekend. Happy Father's Day, folks, and happy birthday to my wife, who will be 29 on June 20th, which is Saturday. Peace.